What's up guys, StefenGalaxy here, and if you're a fan of me, if you're a fan of the channel, if you know me in real life, or if you watch us on twitch.tv/StefenGalaxy, you'll know that we're big fans of indie games around here. And the other day I stumbled upon this really interesting website called askthepeople.com. So it's this website where it's an aggregate of all this data of different questions and things that people are looking for on the internet for any given topic. And I decided, wouldn't it be interesting, in all of my wisdom, in my 1 billion IQ computer intellect, to answer some of the internet's most pressing questions about video games? Because who else is gonna do it? Is someone else gonna do it? Is PewDiePie gonna do it? I don't think so. Or he might have already done it. What are indie video games? This is actually probably the hardest question on the entire list. Defining what exactly is an indie video game is kind of, it's sort of nebulous. Indie games are mostly defined by games that either have independent publishers or studios or development teams that work on the games. And sometimes that can be like a singular person working on a game, and sometimes that can be a team of up to 200 people. Sometimes the game is self-published, and other times the game is published either using really large publishers for independent games like Devolver Digital, or the games will even be supported by like Sony, which we saw with No Man's Sky, or Microsoft, which we saw with Cuphead. The rule of thumb is if a game is not being published by or developed by a studio that we would consider like a AAA studio, so like your Ubisoft, Bethesda's, Activision's, Blizzard's, etc., usually it's going to fall under the blanket of an indie game. Does it matter whether your indie game is made by a single person or by a giant group of people? Not really. When did indie games become so popular? So this one's kind of interesting too. So Steam launched in 2003, and obviously a lot of people know Steam now as the platform where people get their indie games. Xbox Live Arcade launched in 2008, and I think this was a big start for the indie game boom as far as a lot of people are concerned. Xbox Live Arcade was one of the first places where on consoles you were having access to getting independently developed or published games. We saw games like Super Meat Boy and Braid launch in like 2010 and 2011, and those are obviously really big. According to Google Trends, indie game search data really peaked around 2012, 2013. This is sort of fair. So we're seeing the rise of indie games growing in the Xbox Live Marketplace, and indie games are starting to show up on the PlayStation Store. In 2012, we had Torchlight 2, Hotline Miami, Fez, Mark of the Ninja, FTL, Spelunky, and tons of other games releasing. And in 2012, we also saw Indie Game the Movie come out, which is a neat little documentary sort of following the experiences of 3 different groups of people releasing games. I think it's Jonathan Blow, Edmund McMillan, and Phil Fish for Braid, which had already come out, Super Meat Boy, which was coming out, and Fez, which was not out yet at the time. So that seems to be where there's been a big peak. Now, indie games have become a lot more ubiquitous as part of gaming culture. I think a lot of people, whether they realize it or not, are playing or have played indie games just kind of normally now. Why are indie games so popular? This is a really interesting one, and I could talk for like 3 hours about this subject, but instead, I'm just going to make it really simple. I think the thing that people really appreciate about indie games is that unlike, I think what people feel is associated with big AAA titles where it's a ton of companies forcing things and making changes to the person's artistic vision, there's sort of this idea that indie games are really pure. The vision of what kind of game people want to make is going to be pretty similar to the kind of game that's going to come out. There's probably a lot to say. We might make a video in the future about this subject. The perceived notion that indie games are inherently like more artistic or like more representative of like a vision than a AAA game, I think to some extent there is truth to that. but obviously there are a lot of things in the way, like funding and time, that don't necessarily always develop into exactly what a person wants to make. But I think for the most part, the things that people really appreciate about indie games, one, that they're often very different and very portioned experiences that you can have that are not 70-hour long giant RPGs, and two, they're not always going to be $60 games. You can get a lot of indie games for relatively cheap, which I'm sure we're going to address in future questions. Are indie games better than AAA? The answer is no. Really like playing indie games and seeing what kind of things people are making and what kind of like really cool, sick, different things people are coming up with, but that doesn't mean that they're better than AAA games. I am a hardcore simp for Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild specifically. I love me some Dark Souls, God of War 4, that was one of my favorite games. It's okay to like AAA games and like indie games as well. Deal with a lot of people in like indie game spaces, and there's definitely this sort of feeling from quite a few people that AAA games are just garbage and you can't like them, and they're all microtransactions and battle passes and marshmallow concerts, live concerts. Was that a thing? That was a thing in Fortnite. Is Fortnite an indie game? Next question. How are indie games made? For the most part, like every other game, usually the person's just gonna find some kind of engine that they feel comfortable with, and they're gonna build the game out from there. It's pretty common to see indie games running with either like a 16-bit or an 8-bit art style, or some kind of more simplified like pixel art style, and usually that's just to help alleviate some of the complications with making a game when you're, you know, one person or a handful of people. But there are games that look as simple as something like Thomas Was Alone, and as complicated as something like Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. There is no exact sort of recipe for how you have to make an indie game or what it has to look like or what engine you use, right? You can use either Unreal or Unity or Source. It doesn't really matter. People, they make games. So however a normal game is made, it's made the same way. Obviously, you just have to adjust for the size of your project and your budget and, you know, the usual stuff you do. Are indie games profitable? Yes. Are indie games bad? Some of them, I guess. Yeah, some of them. Some of them are really good, and some of them are bad. Just like AAA games. Some of them are really A+, and some of them are A-. And by A, I mean it's actually an F. It's bad. Are indie games free? So the answer is no, but some of them are. I would say more than AAA games. You'll find a lot of free indie games if you browse around, specifically on PC. You'll find a lot of interesting free stuff. That doesn't mean they're all free, obviously, and even though indie games tend to be smaller than AAA titles and tend to have lower budget than AAA titles, they do still charge money because they have to. How do indie games make money? They sell games. Where can I buy indie games? So there's plenty of really good resources if you're interested in buying indie games. Like I previously mentioned, Steam is probably one of the most common or the most popular one. It is an absolutely astoundingly large marketplace for I mean every kind of game. There's tons of AAA games on there as well, but you will find a crazy amount of indie games on there, and they go on sale pretty often. You also have good old games, chrono.gg, itch.io, Xbox Live, PlayStation Store, Nintendo eShop. iOS technically also has indie games if you're about that. Vox Pop Games is a really interesting like peer-to-peer games platform. And you also have my personal favorite, the Humble Store. Now you might be saying, Stefan, are you only hyping up the Humble Store because you're a Humble partner? And if you use the link in the description to sign up for the Humble Monthly, you'll get a little bit of support for your channel and for future projects. No, but that does help. On the real, Humble Store is a sick, a fantastic resource if you're interested in trying out a ton of different games and a ton of different indie games. Not only do they have Humble bundles on sale all the time, it feels like, where you can get tons of games for as low as $1 for multiple games. But they do also have their monthly Humble Choice, and you can pick from an assortment of games every month. And there is a ton of sick, fucking nice stuff on there. So definitely check it out. Link in the description. Help out the channel. I love you. What are the best indie games? There's no answer to this. I can tell you a lot of my favorites. I really like Hollow Knight is definitely a big one. Celeste, I think, was my favorite game of 2017, just narrowly beating out God of War. Return of the Obra Dinn is a really interesting sort of stylized detective game. There's Super Meat Boy, Binding of Isaac, Into the Breach, Pyre. There's a ton. So if you're interested in looking for really high quality 10 out of 10 indie games, I suggest you just do a quick little Google search for the kind of thing you're into. So if you like horror games, you're going to find a lot of stuff in that category. If you like adventure, RPGs, RTS, platformers, which is one of my favorites, there's a ton of stuff on offer, and it's stuff that's going to be a substantially different experience from if you're just used to playing AAA games like Mario and Luigi's and Wario. So hopefully this has been somewhat helpful. If you've had any questions about indie gaming, or why indie gaming is so popular, or why people enjoy it so much, hopefully this has answered a couple of your questions. If you have any interest in really expanding your palette for gaming, do some searches, do your research, check out the online stores on your consoles if you got them. If you're on PC, check out Humble Store, check out Steam, and see what people are playing. There's a ton of really, really cool stuff that you don't want to miss out on, because you don't want to be the ding dong that was like, no, dude, I don't play indie games. All I play is Guitar Hero. You guys remember Guitar Hero? Do they still make Guitar Hero? I don't know. There's probably indie Guitar Hero though. So you don't even have to play Guitar Hero. You can support them. Harmonix. You can support Harmonix. And hey, if you're going crazy already, you're clicking everywhere. You're clicking down there, you're clicking up there. You're all over the dang old internet. Consider hitting that subscribe button and hit the bell too to get notified when a future video goes up. And if you're not following already, follow us on Twitch, twitch.tv/StefenGalaxy, so you can watch me play video games live, and you can talk to me. We have emotes and all that good stuff. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. And if you got any questions or comments, or you just want to compliment me, and I know you do, leave a comment down below, and I'll probably reply. Anyways, thanks again. I'll see you next time. Bye.